I want to introduce today's speaker. I'm very excited. Laura Torraco of, let's see, she's of Taproot Botanicals. She's of Clearpath Herbals. She's my garden manager, apothecary manager, first assistant in all things. And I would say that even more so, she's Laura. You know, she's actively involved in things that don't require having titles or organizations. I think it's wonderful. I've rarely seen somebody so committed to honoring the deep ecology and cultural context of plant medicines and our North American Turtle Island continent, and such a deep love for plants, which is dear to my heart, obviously. So today, I'm not even going to tell you what she's going to be talking about it, because I think you know, and I'm just going to turn it over to her. I will be watching the chat, so if you have any questions, go ahead and ask, type them in, and there'll be time for questions and answers at the end. If there's not too many people, we can open it up to people raising their hands. If there's a lot of people, there may be enough good questions in the chat that could cover the bases. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura now, and I'll be back when she's done talking. All right. A lot.
Awesome. Can everyone see and hear me pretty well? Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, my name's Laura Torraco, as Chris said. So I work with Taproot Botanical Alliance. For those who don't really know what that is, it's a living model for cooperative, sustainable herbal medicine growing. Specifically right now, the work that I'm doing in the Pioneer Valley is working with woodland native species, specifically goldenseal, false unicorn, and ginseng, and hoping to kind of create a sustainable model for sharing resources with other farmers. The end goal being we really want to build a processing hub in the Pioneer Valley where small farmers and small landowners can come and bring their harvests and actually use machinery to help kind of increase the yield and lower the amount of work. Things like cutting and sifting machines and power washers, things like that. So that's like the grand scale of what I'm doing. But what I'm really here to talk to you all about today is the woodland medicinal plants. And my journey with them kind of started a few years back, just learning about them and always kind of having this sense that they were plants that I shouldn't use, that plants that are endangered should just kind of be ignored and left alone in the wild to kind of do their thing by themselves. And as I began working more and more with propagating perennial plants, I came to this realization that that wasn't necessarily true. If you wanted them to actually survive and thrive, they actually need our participation in their life cycle, and they thrive with that participation as well. So I guess one of the first things I really want to talk in this talk is just what exactly relationship is. So we're constantly in relationship with everything all around us. There's this great illusion that we're separate from each other, from the earth, and I actually see that experience of separation going towards the wilderness more than anything. Wilderness is kind of a complex topic, meaning like kind of, it's not linear, like the word wilderness isn't bad in and of itself. More so it needs protection, but also we need to participate with the woods. A lot of people are pretty sure that when colonizers arrived here that there was just wilderness and it was taking care of itself and it was vast and wonderful all on its own, which actually has been proven historically not to be true. These forests of the East Coast seemingly are all food forests that were planted by First Nations people. And food forestry is not even limited just to First Nations people. You can read about food forestry, ancient food forests in Europe, where they actually still are standing and viable food harvesting spaces. Sorry. Yeah, so it's just this idea that we are separate and that our limited idea of what intelligence and technology was and is in Western culture has kind of kept us from seeing the genius of our indigenous predecessors who actually worked so well with the ecosystem and environment that it was pretty hard to even tell if they were doing anything at all. And some of the complexities with going against wilderness is we don't want to take away protections of those lands, but also we want to promote the restoration and the restoration of First Nations methods and technologies back to working with the land, which is a practice of reciprocation and reciprocity. So yeah, reciprocity is pretty foundational to any relationship, and we're constantly in relationship. But if you're in a friendship with someone and you're countlessly giving them your time and your energy and you're never actually getting anything back, that'll end up feeling toxic. And I feel really deeply that this is kind of like where we are in our issues of the world. Is just we're looking so much at the issue and not really looking at the way in which we're relating to the world around us. As an herbalist, one of the most crucial places working with individuals with their health really has to do with the way that they relate, not just to themselves and their body and their healing, but also their habits day to day, anything from food to sleep. And these represent how we relate with ourselves, represents greater into the whole, how we relate with other people in the world around us. And this also is part of herbalism. In order to work with these plants and recommend these plants to other people, there is this kind of necessity to help train the people that we're giving this information to actually go out and have a relationship, a two-way relationship with the natural world around them, not just going around with this kind of ideology that this is all for us and we can take it and it's just going to continue to restore itself. The whole mythology that we are separate from the ecosystem has totally participated in just the current situation, climate-wise, socially-wise. They're all interrelated and all interconnected, and I really feel they can all be kind of funneled back into this place of right and wrong relationship. It's a really powerful place for personal work just to do that, but also to just start to see the world in that way, and it can help cultivate more compassion and ease in helping others to navigate how to tend to these times. So yeah, the traditional indigenous territories that are left on the planet, actually they hold 22% of the land's surface area. And on that 22% of land is 80% of all the biodiversity of our planet. So this ideology that we're separate from these places, it can be seen historically, culturally, spiritually, and in our own personal experiences, just to kind of be a mythos that colonization has kind of propelled in us all. When I started working with woodland plants, I had found a woodland plant grower locally. His name is Lee. He's an older fellow, and I asked him if I could start coming out and working with goldenseal in particular. And I was shocked. I was like utterly floored. He gave me a shovel and he said, just go dig in that patch and divide it all up and use this little hand saw and saw at the roots and make different like groupings of plants. And I did it. I was reluctant because I had always heard about these plants are endangered. And in my mind, that cultivated the sense that they shouldn't be touched, that they're really delicate, that they really don't grow easily. But what I actually found when I returned a few weeks later is that every place I had cut or made a cut, 6 or 7 new goldenseal plants had emerged. So actually, in actively participating in this goldenseal patch, actually propelled its propagation further, actually much faster than planting seeds. So it kind of just took away this myth that I had been telling myself that these endangered plants are something separate, there's something to be conserved and looked at and appreciated, but from afar. So as this kind of ideology started to dissolve further, I continued to figure out what other plants I had that myth about. The next one was false unicorn. And that plant was really interesting because not a lot of people, even in the kind of the United Plant Savers kind of level of conservation of plants, had much information on growing this plant. They have a lot more information out there in the world on goldenseal and ginseng, but finding information on growing false unicorn was really, really hard to come by. And what I actually learned in my own experience with growing this plant was that it really just requires patience and listening and consistent tending to them. So yeah, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was. It was just really just that labor of commitment to those plants. And I actually have some, okay. Yeah, so I actually have some goldenseal seeds here right now. I don't know if you can see them. Here, let's see. Here's a little bigger cluster. So this is a cluster of berries, and there is something, this little hook on them. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little like doodad at the end of the seed. This little doodad is called an elaiosome, and these elaiosomes actually are things that attract ants to them. And the ants will use these and they'll carry this whole berry back into their little ant hole. They'll eat the whole pulp of the berry itself and then just leave you with the seed inside of it. And then those seeds are planted in the ant holes because they don't take them out, and they're very sandy and they get stratified through the winter. So that's an interrelationship that happens with goldenseal. I've actually been taught that in order to propagate goldenseal best by seed, it's best to just take the fresh berry right when you see them, take off all the pulp around it, and then plant it right into the ground. So this is a great way in which every person can go out into their woods and start interrelating with plants immediately, is through planting seeds as you're finding them. And commonly you'll find with woodland plants that they have these very pulpy seed masses, and that's kind of just to endure long enough in order for them to germinate. So by doing this, we actually can interact with the woods around us and help propagate plants that we really love. And it doesn't have to be just held within the herbal medicinal plants, but it's definitely an act that we can all do and participate in. Another thing would be to go out in places you harvest and harvest in an ethical way, researching ways in which you can actually be propelling the propagation of the plants through harvesting. A really great book that I'm sure many of you have heard of is Braiding Sweetgrass. And the whole premise behind what Robin Wall Kilmer is trying to really get across is that in her research of sweetgrass, she was actually finding that through actually interacting with the sweetgrass, through digging out clumps of the sweetgrass, through standing on the soil and battering the sweetgrass a little bit, was actually a huge part of its life cycle. It actually had evolved for human interaction. And then at some point, First Nations people in history were removed from their land, and we no longer have sweetgrass in the gratuity that we had it when the Europeans first arrived here. So it's really interesting just kind of trying to take down these like mental barriers that kind of keep us divided and separate from the woods. Here's some sweetgrass right here, actually. Yeah, so taking down these barriers that keep us in this feeling of separation, this feeling that wilderness does not include humans. It's not serving us, and it doesn't serve the planet. It's really important, I feel, for people to kind of be motivated to just go out into the woods and connect. I mean, we as a species can just easily go for a walk in the woods and feel that power that the woods have, and just that relationship that we can cultivate with it and how much it gives to us. And in order for any fair relationship, it's important to give back and not just take, even if that means just saying thank you, or to go visit a native stand of plants that have really just inspired you on your daily walk and helping them to propagate and grow, getting to know who they are, getting to know their names. Yeah, so I just, and little bit more of a historical construct. A lot of these plants are oftentimes in our history were really powerful and very intimately involved with humans. Golden seal for one, there's something like 80 million pounds of golden seal that were removed from eastern woodlands in the late 1800s for pharmaceuticals and things like that. And this is still happening today with things like black cohosh. But the thing is, they're never really giving back. And there's also this idea that humans, individuals, are the only ones responsible for things like this. And I see this as like a macro, micro kind of thing, where it's always the individuals who are going out and harvesting these plants and over harvesting them. When the reality is it's more complex than that. It's more complex than wildcrafters causing all of this. It also has to do with loss of land, just the climate in and of itself, loss of biodiversity, loss of just space in general for these plants to be. And I feel like if we're going to continue as a human species to work with these plants and use them as medicine, then we have to participate in their life cycle. Yeah, so golden seal is one that really got me into it, just because of the ease in which it grew just with my own involvement. And now I'm dividing golden seal patches around the Pioneer Valley, and they're all thriving and they're expanding every year by a large amount, much more noticeable than years where I wasn't interacting with them. And as far as I know, I can't think, or I haven't been told of any wild stands of golden seal in Massachusetts, but there are wild stands left of false unicorn. And it's really interesting because the false unicorn plant is most indicated because it's called a fairy wand is another name for it. And it grows like this big long wand, kind of like a black cohosh, has a bunch of little flowers all over it, and then it droops over. Whereas the wild false unicorn that live in Massachusetts have actually evolved to no longer put out flowers, but just to actually reproduce through rhizome travel. And I actually was just reading on a botanist forum that they found a wild stand of the false unicorn in Martha's Vineyard, which is just perplexing people in the plant community, because it's like, how did these plants get here? We have always kind of thought of them as being like these deep forest plants that need like this very rich soil, this really like intimate biodiversity. And the reality is that these plants actually grow in multiple different environments, different soil types. They just want to be planted and they want to be grown, and they need our help right now. So for every student that comes through any kind of teaching or class or anything like that, the one thing I really wish to leave them with is just a sense of empowerment, but also of responsibility. Responsibility to themselves and responsibility to others, but responsibility to the earth and to the things they're interrelating with within the sphere of the earth. And that is, I think, going to take us a lot farther on that kind of individualized level. There's also, it's not always the individual's responsibility or capacity to fix some of the more ecological trying issues of our times. A huge thing that is going to be an issue is just access to land. Private land ownership makes it really hard for actually expanding in a large way. There's so much land that is just privatized. So part of this whole talk is trying to help motivate and promote the idea to people who have that kind of privilege of access to woodlands to start working with these plants and propagating them. And it's much easier than you would think. It's really a mythology that we've kind of like co-created and upheld together. Everything that I remember as a child being told about the woods was like the big bad wolf and don't go into the woods. There's an old lady who lives in a shoe kind of thing. But these kind of stories kind of are really deep and really like affect us. And I think we're still, or for myself personally, I'm just still trying to unravel and kind of unpack what those constructs that were given to me as a child were. And the more I interrelate with the natural world around me, the more I realize I'm actually very much so a part of it. Yeah, so golden seals preferred habitat. Sorry, I got a question. Golden seals preferred habitat is usually it is the woods. I prefer to grow it under deciduous plants or deciduous trees, meaning non-evergreens, so no pines or hemlocks. The reason being is the soil actually can become really acidic from the breakdown of pine needles and hemlock needles. So under deciduous, uh, full to mostly shaded. I actually have a golden seal. I live in downtown Millers Falls. I have a golden seal growing in my front yard that probably gets 3/4 of the day shade, with a fourth of it getting midday sun, and it's actually doing quite well. And it's growing in horrible, compacted, sandy kind of runoff soil. It's kind of just my experiment to see the capacity of the plant. I'm finding that they actually aren't as weak as we kind of, that word endangered kind of arises out of us. I also find with the golden seal, like if you're trying to start a patch, totally using fresh berries, if you have access to them, is great, but also just getting a plant from someone nearby and planting that and then letting it grow for the first year, just untouched, letting it acclimate to its environment. And then in the next following year, in the spring, before it's done flowering, you want to take that plant, and usually you'll get like a few shoots and a little cluster of them. And you actually want to like divide it in half. So you can dig it out, or you can actually just use your shovel and divide it and scoop out half of it and put it a little bit spaced away. And what I find is all the space in between will actually fill in with more golden seal. That's honestly the best way I've found to propagate it. It's much faster than growing by seed. It's much less time consuming, and it seems to be like the most like every time I do it, it seems to be working. So it's a really awesome and easy way to relate with these plants. For those who don't know what golden seal is, it's Hydrastis canadensis. It's in the buttercup family. It's long long talked about for its antimicrobial powers of their respiratory system, the immune system, but it's also a super mucous membrane lover. So this plant has been used for a really long time, from everything from tooth infections and skin infections to internally. It has a constituent in it called berberine. And it's found, that constituent is found in many plants, and that kind of tells you that it gives it kind of that bitter flavor, but it also tells you that it has that antimicrobial kind of power to it. Yeah. So in 1991, golden seal went on the endangered species list, and there's awesome organizations right now like United Plant Savers. I highly recommend everyone who's interested in this kind of thing check their work out. They've been doing huge pushes to get people to just generally have more awareness around the overharvest of these plants. And there's been a pretty big movement around golden seal and reviving it. Ginseng is a completely different beast. If you're in like North Carolina, the legality alone to grow ginseng commercially is quite, you have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to be able to do it. Here in Massachusetts, no one's really doing it, so they don't really have that legality set up yet. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, but the thing with ginseng that I'm actually finding is it is also not one that like needs as much. It just kind of needs consistency, and it needs active involvement in the relationship in order for it to actually respond. So I get stratified seeds from the United Plant Savers Ginseng Sanctuary, Robert Itis down in North Carolina, and he actually stratifies them for me. For those who don't know what stratification is, it's a technique in which you're actually scarring the seed so that germination can happen, because commonly with woodland seeds, they're very hard. and it's a protection evolutionary kind of thing. So you want to like use a little bit of grit to kind of break that shell so germination can happen. Ginseng, again, it wants to be in a deciduous area. It doesn't really prefer to be under the evergreens. Same reason as Psittaceous soil. I find that it really likes really rich, composty, rich and like biodegraded, like composted matter. The beds that we have set up are just pretty much sheer compost. And we plant seeds in them every year and kind of get a different succession rate. Something really interesting that I found was that if I put leaves on them in the fall and then just let them be and hibernate, and then in the spring I took those leaves off, my germination rate actually increased probably by 50 or 60%. So that one act can save a lot. Some of the other things that I've learned through ginseng is also mulching them. You don't really want to interact with weeding just because the rhizome is really delicate in its first or second year. And ginseng is a plant that takes quite a while before it will flower and make seeds. But again, it also has a cluster of berries, just like the golden seal. And it's the same thing. If you're going to plant it fresh, just take apart the berry, remove the pulp, put the seed right into the ground, and say a prayer and let it go. That's one of the easiest ways that you can work with it. Otherwise, sowing a bed of them or even getting some starts off of someone to just get them going. Ginseng berries are edible. Something very interesting too that I read was dwarf ginseng, which I've actually seen, I won't say abundant, I've seen it around in this area quite a bit, just growing wild. Dwarf ginseng actually has more of the active constituents that are found in the root of American ginseng in its leaf, which I thought was really interesting. I think it's called like ginsengicides or something. It's some constituent. You can easily look that up. But it's so interesting to me that the greens of this plant actually contain constituents in just as much amounts as the roots. The berries are edible. Golden seal berries are also edible. I ate one earlier. It tastes kind of like a blackberry without flavor. It's kind of like a watered down blackberry. Yeah. So on to the next one, which is false unicorn. False unicorn is a really interesting plant. It doesn't have berry clusters. It's not in the buttercup family or their Reciprocity family. But false unicorn, it grows, it's very low to the ground. The first time I saw one, I actually was pretty convinced that I've probably seen them before and just never knew it because they're so inconspicuous until they're actually flowering. The flower is a pretty dead giveaway. It just shoots out a very long wand and kind of like flips over a little bit. Has all these little white flowers. The thing with false unicorn is you need both a male and a female plant in order to make seeds. And the flowers it's hard to tell until the flowers really come out which plant is male and which one is female. And if you do happen to come across it and you have both and you have seeds, again, you would take those seeds and you can plant them directly into the ground nearby, or you can take them home and start them in trays. You want to use sterilized soil. And sometimes it'll take up to 2 years for the seeds to germinate. As far as it takes for the plant to flower, could be anywhere from 4 to 7 years before you see a flower. And it could be anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 years before you even see the plant emerge in its full like life cycle, which I find really interesting. False unicorn is amazing medicine. It was just completely over harvested. And if you actually look and work with a plant, you can easily tell why. They're very small. The roots are very small. And to think how many hundreds of thousands of plants had to be dug up just to make like one bottle of medicine is kind of amazing, especially in the pharmaceutical realm. So interrelating with these plants, while it seems difficult, it isn't. It's mostly just our own, oh, these aren't annuals. It's not the way I'm used to growing. It's kind of asking of us to be better in our relationship to them and to each other, which is to not just acknowledge what our capacities are, but to acknowledge what their needs are, and to listen and to do our best to abide by what they are needing, like you would with any good friend, especially a friend who's in a hard place. You definitely wouldn't go there and say, I know what you need. And that's how I have generally kind of gotten a feeling of with these plants, is they kind of want us just to not assume what they need and to listen to them and to experience them and to let them teach us and help us be taught how to break down these kind of walls and these films that keep us from separation. The idea that humans don't belong to the earth or to the wilderness is just, it's a very interesting, weird myth that I hope gets dissolved over time, because I definitely think the woods are needing us. And here is a lovely golden seal leaf that Chris actually brought in for my patch outside, just in case you're wondering what the plant looks like. And this will grow straight out of the ground like this. And the little berries will grow right on top. You kind of can't miss them. They're bright red. So yeah, and just to go backtrack a little bit, I really highly implore you all to investigate wild, or what is considered wild food forests that already exist on the East Coast. Places where you're walking in the woods and all of a sudden there's just a huge stand of hickories and persimmons and all these food sources, and they're hundreds of years old, and they totally don't mesh in with the outer parameter environments. Also, for those who have European descent, looking into not wild, food forests of Europe, where they actually really worked with hazelnuts. Hazelnuts was a huge survival food. And there's remnants of some of these food forests that were planted 300, 400, 500 years ago that are still alive today, still viable, still feeding and nourishing people and wildlife all around us. And not to mention just forest farming, for me on a personal level, it's easier. I'm not necessarily relying on rows of cultivated field plants anymore. I'm kind of working more with creating interrelationships within the system that's already in an interrelationship with itself. So I'm just participating in this simpler way. The work's a lot less on the body, and also just being out in the elements is a lot less. So I highly implore for those who feel like they can't work outside because it's just too hot, or the limitations of just their physical ability, to actually explore working in more woodland settings, because it's honestly more comfortable. Awesome. Yeah. So I'm wondering if anyone has any questions so far. No. Awesome. Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so
Are there other plants you would suggest working in the forest other than just those three?
oh, totally. Those three I highlighted just because those are the ones I'm working with really intimately this year. But other plants are black cohosh, blue cohosh. Let's see, bloodroot's another one, wild ginger, wild jam, collinsonia, ramps is another one. I've had pretty decent luck increasing ramp patches through, you know how they grow in like really tight clusters. Actually going out like kind of like towards this time of year, closer towards September, and going in with your shovel and taking those bulbs and spreading them out. And what will happen when you plant them is they'll actually die back, which will probably cause you to think that you messed up. But if you go back in the spring and you remove the leaves off of the area, you'll actually find that a lot of them come back, and a lot of them expand, and they expand a lot easier and a lot quicker, and they stop choking each other out. So interrelationship doesn't necessarily just have to be planting, but it could be just like aiding and being of service to those kind of plant populations that kind of just tend to like have really small amounts of space, so they just bunch there and kind of kill themselves in some way, or just kind of slow their progress. Spikenard is another one, according to Chris. I haven't worked with that one. Collinsonia is a really amazing one. That one is actually a woodland mint. And for anyone who is kind of interested more on like trauma and healing and working through that and using plant medicine, it actually is a really amazing vagus nerve medicine. It's lesser known for that. Another name for that plant, a more common name, is stone root. And yeah, black and blue cohosh. Black cohosh is an interesting one because I've never had difficulty growing it. In fact, I've actually had difficulty keeping it from growing into other things. It just kind of, if it's happy, it's kind of going to take over wherever you are. So my advice to people when they're working with planting or growing black cohosh is to just put it in a space where it can do that. Because once it's there, it's really hard to remove the roots, because even if you leave a little piece, it's just going to keep shooting out new shoots in the spring. So black cohosh is a pretty easy one. The reason why that one is kind of more on the endangered at-risk level is because there's pharmaceutical companies currently, even in this modern times, that come to the eastern forest from Europe and actually harvest hundreds of thousands, probably even more pounds of black cohosh. And it's easy to grow. You would think more farmers grow it, but actually it doesn't get a good enough price for woodland farmers to necessarily grow the amount these pharmaceutical companies need and stuff. So it's kind of like created this system in which like the plant is at risk and certain areas are endangered, but it's more so just because it's completely being over-harvested by these pharmaceutical companies. There's so many ways in which you can harvest these plants and not destroy the population. So it's kind of needing a paradigm shift just on the individual level, but also needing a paradigm shift like in our economic and corporate level. Yeah.
I have a question.
Awesome.
Can you hear me? Okay. For, a super lay person who's, walking through the woods and perhaps recognizes like one or two things that they know, what's the best method of taking what you might need for yourself, just for personal use, while leaving enough for like not destroying like the area? And the one thing that I'm aware of is, if you see perhaps 5 or 10 different plants of the same thing, don't take every single one, obviously, but what else would you say on that?
So there's a few rules or code of ethics that were taught to me that I've kind of revised into my own. If you only see one or a couple, don't take it. It's not for you. Another one is getting to know the plant you're working with. And that doesn't just necessarily mean like what it's good for you. More so getting to know its life cycle, getting to know its population, getting to know any kind of harms or like kind of like and things that impact its growth cycle. And also just kind of getting to know how it grows so you can be of service to the population. But specifically, a lot of the woodland plants, you're kind of harvesting the roots. So there's a way of harvesting the roots in which you harvest out the root. You have like your whole root. We'll pretend this is it. And you get your plant attached, which is there. So what you would actually be doing is you would be slicing off this little corner of it, and you would take that part and you would replant the other part. Now this is really specific for like kind of more rhizomatic plants, but it can be kind of adapted for other plants that have different root systems as well. You don't necessarily have to kill the plant to take all of the medicine. One rule of thumb that I would use if you're going to use that method is only take a fourth. And I would also say if you're in a total population, like only take a fourth. And it has to be a really healthy, viable population to really justify that. Otherwise, I would highly suggest getting those medicine sources from people who are cultivating it, just to keep that population safe. It's kind of a very personal and ethical question that we have to ask ourselves about removing things from the woods, especially the at-risk and endangered plants. I think there's totally times when that access is necessary for certain people. For myself, I'm not going to go do that because I have access in other places to go do that, and I don't need the medicine that quickly. So yeah, it's definitely like it's a good question to ask yourself and to ask other people who work with harvesting plant medicines. Definitely also, I highly suggest remembering that plants are crazily intelligent. They're more intelligent than I think we even have the capacity to understand. They're pretty much professional chemists. They're at a level of chemistry just in their own being day to day than any human combined who knows chemistry on this planet. They're just like pumping out phytochemicals. So like remembering that these are divinely intelligent beings, have a relationship with them, communicate with them, let them know what you're doing, and let them know that you're just needing something from them, and that you will try your best to help kind of promote their growth. But definitely like read a lot of the plants you're working with as far as like what their plant species is doing as far as survival level goes. False unicorn is just a premier woman's herb. As far as I've been told, it's just an amazing uterine tonic that's been used for a long time in the history of this country and the people who have been living here for all kinds of female complaints. I was even reading that they used to use it for pinworms and worm infections and things like that. And the eclectics called it Helonius, according to Chris. So that might actually be more familiar of a word for a lot of people. From my to that's weird. Did anyone else have a question?
Yeah, hi. This is Michael. I just I put questions so that I could prompt. So thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering, because I know I've read that black cohosh, there are mixed opinions on this. Well, not black cohosh, but false unicorn. No, actually, it's black cohosh. Sorry, I'm mixing things together. Beyond 6 months to a year may not be the smartest idea, and goldenseal is used acutely. So I'm just wondering if someone chooses to cultivate with also a commercial, to grow for the community or for, to sell to apothecaries or whatever it may be, beyond just for self and family. Are there, of the ones you've covered today, or just in general of the woodland ones, is there one or two that comes to mind that would be more likely to, how do I say this, to be an herbal that would be profitable? I hate using that word, but just so that, if we choose to grow and do it so that the business is sustainable, is there one or two of the ones you've mentioned that kind of check out in that regard?
Yeah, totally. I would say goldenseal is probably definitely one of them. The reason being is you can get a pretty good profit for the amount of work that you have to do, especially if you can get actual goldenseal plants to start with, then you can start harvesting in that first year. I have read a lot of cultivated woodland plants, specifically with goldenseal, and ginseng, they actually get a lot of fungal issues, but I kind of have like this theory that a lot of those issues are because some of the places where they're large scale cultivating this, it's literally like just monocultured forest growing. Like it'll just be like a huge swath of just one plant. So if you do end up going into like more of a commercial growing of those plants, like just remember biodiversity increases the health and vibrancy of any plant population that exists in that ecosystem. But there are totally like, it's one of the lesser, I guess you don't have to wait 7 years like you do with ginseng in order to harvest it, which is really nice. And actually, like every cut you make in that root of the whole plant, you're going to get more plants anyways. So you can actually harvest from your patch. You can powderize it. You can make products from it. You can dry it and sell it. But you're actually like promoting the growth of the plant, not just like for one plant, but every single cut. And if you look at the roots of goldenseal, it's kind of got like the gangly, like wide spreading ones. So there's lots of places for new plants to grow when you're cutting off just the tips of them. Whereas with things like ginseng, it's just kind of like one rhizome, or Solomon seal is just one rhizome, or false unicorn is just one rhizome. So I do find goldenseal to be most like, kind of like what you give into it is well worth what the payout is without having to wait 7 years, because not everyone can wait 7 years for a harvest. So that's one I would highly suggest working with, like as far as that goes. I definitely see nothing wrong with people commercially growing these. I actually hope more people start commercially growing these, because as herbalism rises, and the industry itself grows, we're still like lacking a lot of herbal farmers. So in order to meet these needs on a community level, we need individual communities trying and attempting to sustain their community's needs. And a lot of people use goldenseal. You're more apt to find people reaching for goldenseal than you would with American ginseng, just because American ginseng is really expensive, because of it takes 7 years before you can even harvest it. But also just because I personally, in a clinical experience, wouldn't use American ginseng on everyone. Whereas if someone has, say, like an abscess in their tooth, or an infection in their arm, or a urinary tract infection, all kinds of things, I'm going to go for goldenseal. While it is an acute medicine, it has all these awesome practical uses, and especially in the first aid level, which makes it really awesome to just keep around your house. So that's why I would probably go more for goldenseal. Another one would be black cohosh, just because of its ease. You kind of just plant it and it goes feral and it goes crazy. And at some point you might actually be like, why did I plant this?
That's really interesting, I'll just say, because I thought, intuitively that because goldenseal is used acutely just for a matter of days, as opposed to, tonic herbs that are used for years. I thought, the demand for that wouldn't be as high over the long term, but it seems like because it is more prolific and regenerative, or so, it regenerates itself well, that it would be smart as far as profitable choices. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, totally. And another thing is like goldenseal, as Chris whispered in my ear, like everyone gets sick. So every winter, people are going to be looking for that plant. It kind of has like a household name, kind of like echinacea. Not quite like on the echinacea level where everyone knows, like if I'm getting sick, I'm going to take echinacea. But goldenseal is pretty high up there. A lot of people are reaching for it. And I also like to look at input versus output. So if you're putting in a lot of energy, like you want that input, that export of what you're getting out of it to be adequate enough to compensate for that. And I'm not saying not to grow these plants that take longer amounts of time, because you're definitely very profitable to work with ginseng and false unicorn on that level. But don't have it as your sole design piece of using your land if you're trying to like sustain yourself for 7 years. Unless maybe you're in a really unique position and you have that opportunity to do that. And another thing with woodland plants is you're going to do a lot of work in the spring. and you're going to do a lot of harvesting work in the fall. Otherwise, you're kind of just going and checking on the stands. You're going to give them water in a drought, things like that, but they're not really requiring a lot. And if you're using the right kind of human, like kind of creative technologies, like using mulch, leaf mulch in specific, you're not going to have weeds and things like that. Any other questions? So someone asked, is there a ginseng mafia in West Virginia, and will they find me if I try to grow it? I've been growing it for a few years now, and they haven't found me. Maybe I've never heard of any kind of ginseng mafia. I will say in the South, people rob people's ginseng plants. It's a cash crop. An acre or two could be $1 million or $2 million harvest. So it can get pretty nasty as far as like people looting and people having to create security systems and protection. So I highly suggest if you're growing ginseng to not tell people. Even the people you think are really close in your community, word travels really fast in these small communities. So don't tell people where they are. You can tell people what you're doing, but you don't have to disclose the information to them. It's definitely something to be aware of and to protect yourself and to protect the plants that you're growing too. But honestly, as far as where we are geographically, not enough people are as aware of ginseng in this area and growing it, and that kind of, we don't have that cultural history of people going out and living and creating income off of wild harvesting, quite like the Appalachians of the South do. So I do feel a little bit safer here, but it still needs to be shared that it's definitely not something you want to like go run around and tell everyone where your ginseng patch is. Yeah, and that's another good point. Vermont has a lot of sanctions around it. Like I mentioned, in North Carolina having a lot of sanctions. Massachusetts, there's not really any as far as growing, cultivating, and selling it. As far as what I mean when I'm saying sanctions, it means there's a whole system designed just for people who are growing ginseng, a whole legal hoops kind of thing that you have to jump through in order to even be able to get a certificate saying it's cultivated ginseng, or wild simulated ginseng, however it is you're growing it. So it's definitely something to be aware of, because I feel like more and more people are going to start growing these plants. So it's also really good to keep our eye on legislature around working with the land on that level, because as more people do it, Massachusetts probably will try to get taxes out of it. So definitely a good thing to be aware of. Any other questions? So yeah, I highly suggest to everyone to just like, next time you're on a walk, just start to notice what's noticing you. To not even like pay attention to the world around you, but to just get a sense of what's calling to you and to get to know whatever that plant is. It might be something strange where you just see like the wind blow through a tree and you feel like you're being acknowledged on some level, but just getting to know the plants that live in your forest that is all around you, knowing their names, knowing how they grow, knowing what their needs are, and knowing how they're not thriving. And maybe, just maybe like participating in helping them to thrive again. We're only as strong as the weakest member of our community. And I think that is shared both by humans as much as it is in the plant realm.
Hi, can you see me? To the first question, two other things came to mind when you were saying, how can I harvest the wildcraft things and not make such an impact? In the case of goldenseal, for a lot of purposes, barberry, which is invasive, is also growing rampantly through the woods here. and nobody would give you, they would be clapping if you would go in there and take them away. And that root can be used for a lot of issues. Goldenseal might be better for lung and respiratory issues, but you can use barberry for a lot. The second thing, like Laura was saying, is that they're finding that the medicines that are in the root are also in the leaf. So taking the leaf medicine is not killing the plant. And she said, like more ginseng, which grows in a carpet in the springtime in certain locations in our woods, the medicine's in the leaf. The medicine's also in ginseng leaf. The medicine's also in goldenseal leaf. It's also in gold thread leaf in the woods. So you can take enough for yourself there and not worry about taking the plant. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So if there are no other questions, just like to remind you that next week will be the third herb walk for the garden. Maybe sorry about that. Just to let you know, next week is an herb walk, and I think I'll be talking about spikenard, and then the following week is Verena's long experience in Chinese herbalism. And, you're going to want to hear that because fall is right around the corner, and that's when a lot of fun happen. And then there'll be one final walk for the season. Laura for bringing into our awareness all these plants and how we can be more involved with it and speak about it. So, no other questions? Let's say good night and see you next week. And at one point in a few days, we'll make this available in a trim form as a link on the local harmony website. So you can tell people if they want to hear this, if you are interested, that they'll be able to go to that website, localharmony.org, and listen to this talk and all the others. All right, everybody. Take care. The herb walk is Zoom audio. I did the walk in the gardens with plants when they were in their peak. So I'm bringing it to you. It's not live because we're conforming with COVID protocol. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions? Can you hear me? If we're good, I'm going to say goodbye. I'll just look one more time to see if I can see everybody. Any other questions about any of it? Otherwise, see ya. Thank you, everybody. Take care.